Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ventures, a new show where my guests and I get to explore market landscapes, problem spaces, hear stories of entrepreneurship, and explore together how new products and services might be able to be built, either for profit or nonprofit, to help meet the needs of human beings. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about life sciences and the need for transparency in healthcare today. My first guest is Dr. Jeffrey Rowe. He's a spine surgeon and the CEO of IntuitiveX, which is a life sciences incubator and consultancy based out of Seattle, Washington. My second guest, Susie Kataoka. She's an amazing entrepreneur and the CEO of Transpara Health, which is a company devoted to bringing transparency to the costs and prices of healthcare today. And my third guest, Dr. Tony Little, is literally my older brother, and he and I have been nerding out recently about blockchains and life sciences and entrepreneurship and how to bring new products and services to life to make patient experiences better, etc. So I'm excited to have him on the show as well. Now, in traditional startup fashion, you may have noticed the audio and video of this episode isn't exactly perfect. In the COVID era, everyone's in their home offices and in their kitchens and bedrooms and various places. So we're doing the best we can. Thank you for bearing with us if the audio and video aren't yet perfect. Now, as a disclaimer, I work as an operator investor with a group called Proto Ventures. We get involved in the early stages of entrepreneurship, and we're working closely with IntuitiveX to help incubate with Susie, Transpara Health. So, with that, I'm excited to have this new show. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you're listening, you can actually watch the episodes as well. If you visit wclittle.com, you'll see the videos there. And if you're watching, you can also listen to this podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. So with that, welcome. I'm excited to start this new venture, and please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation. All right, welcome to the show. I'm glad to have the three of you with us here.
To be here.
Thanks for having us, Will.
Absolutely. So Jeff, we'll start with you. Happy to have you introduce yourself.
Sure, be happy to. My name is Jeff Rowe. I'm the CEO of IntuitiveX, which is a life science incubator / consultancy based in Seattle. We started about probably 4.5 years ago, and it was in response to some of the things that were happening in the marketplace. Over time in the medical device, pharma, and biotech industries, over the course of the last 5 or 10 years, there have been less and less opportunities for entrepreneurs and startups to develop innovations within healthcare and life sciences. And it was a little bit different probably about 10 or 15 years ago, when there were opportunities to really develop products and services that were innovative within these large companies. But over time, what's happened is that these large multinational corporations within life sciences, they've really gone out to a very different model by which they are now acquiring de-risk companies, startup companies that fit within their portfolio. And so a couple things happened where these companies have now gone to that type of model where they're actually going out and acquiring companies, and that has resulted in an environment where entrepreneurs, including clinicians, scientists, and technologists, have had less opportunities to work with these large companies to develop from within these companies. And so we felt that it was a good opportunity for us to start a life science incubator and consultancy that could help address these two pain points on both the entrepreneur startup side as well as the sort of the big company industry side. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to talk about some of the changes in healthcare that are happening today, and in conjunction with my other guests, Susie and and your brother Will, Tony. And so I think we bring a very different perspective to this discussion. So thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking more about IntuitiveX as we proceed here. Susie, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here. So Transpara has been something that has been really exciting to be a part of more and more every day with all of the changes that are happening in the world and the way that it's really validating the problems that we are trying to solve. And so our main objective from the beginning has always been about transparency and access to healthcare. Healthcare is one of the few things, if maybe the only thing, that affects every single person in the world, right? And yet it is such a big problem, and especially here in the US, something that continues to increase in cost and effect that we're having, like, this global pandemic that we're being affected by. And so we believe that by enabling and empowering people to have the information that they need to be able to make informed decisions for themselves and their families, and then also the proper access to the care that they need, we think that's going to really change the way that healthcare is done, and that it's going to reduce the cost and provide better outcomes for people.
Awesome. Tony, what's up, bro?
Hey, what's up, Will? Hey, Susie and Jeff. Thanks for having me on. Tony Little. I'm a trained naturopathic doctor. I work currently my day job for Optum as the lead architect for the patient experience. I think it's critically important for, especially in this post-COVID world, that we think differently about how people in the United States and throughout the world interact with the healthcare system. I've sort of dedicated a majority of my professional life thinking about how we succeed. We make that successful through changes in how data is exchanged between systems to let the doctor have their information at the right time, the right data at the right time to make really good decisions for the relationship and have better outcomes ultimately. I also work as an advisor for Proto Ventures, the company that Will and team and others are involved in here on the healthcare side, and looking forward to the discussion today.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I'd like to take, before we dive into all of the topics around healthcare, I'd like to take just a moment and learn a little bit more about the three of you personally. What is the journey that you've taken to get to where you're at professionally now that has led to the ventures that the three of you are on, either together or individually? So Jeff, let's start with you.
Sure. So for me, I'm going to step way back. So I was actually born in Suwon, South Korea, and then immigrated to the U.S. at the age of 5. And then I've been living in the Seattle area ever since. Went to University of Washington undergrad. I actually knew Susie, so we actually grew up together. So we've been friends for quite some time. And I met Tony through you, Will, probably within the last 2 or 3 years. For me, I think it all started my journey as an entrepreneur sort of during my training. So I'm also a practicing physician by training, just like Tony. I'm more on the surgical side, but during my training, I developed some intellectual property that had to do with a minimally invasive way of placing in spinal implants through a laser guided approach, and it was as a result of the how would I describe this? The morbidity associated with the way that we do surgery today. It's pretty archaic, and I think that over time, surgeons naturally by design develop ways to do it less invasively. So that it's in the best interest of the patient. So it's kind of like this: like building a ship outside of the bottle is difficult enough, but trying to build a ship within a bottle is really hard, right? So if you're able to do that, though, in this sort of model, it would be the patient would be the bottle. If you're able to build that ship within a bottle, it's much less morbid than breaking open the bottle and then building a ship within it, right? So that what ended up was I developed this technique to do spine surgery in a less invasive fashion, and then I tested and validated that model, and then I protected the intellectual property, and then went around to different companies. And at first, I got a lot of rejections. It was pretty humbling, like going through that process of taking an idea, sort of my own baby, and then showing other people,
Right.
and then really getting a lot of people to say that's not going to work, or it's not ready. It's not ready for prime time. But finally, I ended up at a company called Stryker Corporation, based in Kalamazoo. Their spine division was based in New York, New Jersey area at the time. And then they believed in my vision. So I had an opportunity to get my IP acquired from them. So I assigned my IP to them, and subsequently started working on several surgical design and innovation teams. So it really gave me an opportunity to work with really high quality engineers and technologists in order to develop these products, and really go from this like open surgery platform to a minimally invasive platform. So that's what I helped them to do.
Did you have to
So that
work?
was it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot from that entire process. And then once we actually developed the product, then we took it through the FDA, and then once it was cleared, then we had an opportunity to then take it out and commercialize it. And then they actually had me go to different areas of the world, including Europe, Asia, and Australia, and teach surgeons how to do these techniques. So it was a really great opportunity to see how a big company innovated, and I would say that these companies do still innovate, but in a very different model, as I previously explained. So that started off my journey as an entrepreneur. In the startup field, I got started probably around 2009, where I had an opportunity to join a biologic startup company based down in Southern California. And the founder of this company was a very brilliant biomedical engineer. So he developed this proprietary process to take the growth factors that help bone to heal, and then bind those growth factors onto dead bone or cadaver bone. So to make a long story short, I essentially helped him to bring together a group of investors for early seed funding, then put together a scientific advisory board, and we helped them to publish some papers, including white papers that could convince surgeons that this was a very new and novel product on the marketplace. We helped grow the business, and we had a successful exit about 4 or 5 years later. So based on that experience and my previous experience with Stryker, we put together a team of people with very different skill sets that are necessary in order to take an idea from concept to commercialization. That's how IntuitiveX was born.
Nice. Do you see other surgeons starting companies and doing things like that often, or is that relatively rare?
Historically, I think it's less common, but I think we're seeing it more now. Actually, I'm seeing a lot more physicians getting their MBAs and going into startups, going into consulting, going into the industry much more than we saw before. I mean, I think Tony is also a great example of a physician who decided to go into industry as well, and that's necessary. I think historically we've been very sort of isolated on our own, just doing our own thing and letting others make decisions for us, But I think going forward, you're going to see a lot of people in healthcare sort of delve into other areas, including, startups and innovation.
Yeah.
And it's really important to make sure that you have the contributions not only of the clinicians, but also from scientists, from business people, from IP specialists and attorneys. You have to have all these components in place in order for you to have a successful venture, you can't just do it with just a clinician or just a technologist or just a business person, because those things don't work. We have a presentation coming up to the Alliance of Angels in about a couple hours, and in the presentation we talk about a four-legged stool in innovation within the startup world in life sciences. And those four legs include clinical, scientific, IP, and business. So although you might be able to take off one and maybe it can stand on a three-legged stool, if you take off two of those or more, then the stool can't stand, And it was even true at Stryker, where we saw some designs that engineers would produce for surgeons to be used intraoperatively without any surgeon input. It just didn't make any sense. Like it didn't feel right. The ergonomics of it just didn't work very well. And conversely, when surgeons have these ideas of making products and services on their own, without any input from the engineers, then you have a product that seems very good, but it's not very manufacturer ready, and it's not maybe it's not even doesn't make sense from a business standpoint. And so I think you need all these contributions together in order to make a successful venture within the life sciences.
Yeah. Did you have to, for your own IP, did you have to work with the university tech transfer system, or was that a relatively more individual or smooth process?
Yeah, it was more individual because of the fact that I had worked on these ideas outside of my normal day-to-day job as a doctor. And I think that that's one of the things I also learned as well. So it's important to be able to collaborate with multiple domain experts. But what I actually did was I protected the IP on my own, meaning like on the evenings and on the weekends, I did the work.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also had to do all the work by myself then, right? I couldn't use the resources of a large organization like a university or a large company in order to do what I wanted to do. And I learned a lot from that process. So there are both advantages and disadvantages of doing it sort of individually versus doing it with a larger organization. And so we try to strike a good balance between the two, of doing it, looking at it from a purely individual entrepreneur, really early stage startup perspective versus a late stage, very mature company, maybe even a publicly traded company. We work with quite a few companies even now, even publicly traded companies. Like the call I had right before this was with one of our new portfolio companies that merged together with another company on the East Coast called Canaptic. And we had an opportunity to get on a call with Stryker's head of IP. And so we still collaborate with these large companies to take a look at it from the entrepreneur's perspective of what do we need to do in order to get these companies ready for potential acquisition down the line, downstream. And then from the industry's perspective, take a look at the deal flow that we have that may have products and services that may fit very well into your portfolio of the areas that you specialize in. So we try to take a look at it from both perspectives.
Very cool. Yeah, later I'm going to ask you about advice for founders that are maybe coming through and having to navigate protecting IP and things like that. But
sure.
Yeah. So Susie, so now you're CEO and founder of Transpara Health. I'm curious to learn more about your story that brought you to where you are today, and even the story behind why you helped start Transpara.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I come from a family of physicians. Even my grandmother on my mother's side, she went to med school, which, back in Korea at that time, very few women just went to school and on to medical school. It's just that after her first week of med school, the Korean War broke out. So she was never able to finish. But even on my father's side, my grandfather and my father were both physicians. But as much as I loved the sciences and all of that, school was just not for me. The memorizing, regurgitating a lot of the information. So I knew that med school was not the direction for me, but wanted to be in that space because I saw the impact that it had on people in such a profound way. You know, I used to go to my dad's office on the weekends to help and just even do admin work and see the interaction. And I saw how much it made a difference in people's lives. And so I've always wanted to be in the space, just not sure how. And, but my main vision was actually to be a missionary since I was a kid. And so even as I was preparing for all of that, I knew that if I'm headed to the Amazon, how many doctors really are out there? And the tribe that I was going to be living with, I knew that there was no physician in any you know, area that was within a day's travel. So my dad helped me pack this really big medical emergency kit with EpiPen, you know, laminated directions that he had handwritten, pages and pages of directions of all the meds that I might possibly need. So during my time there, you know, people that got snake bites, people that had worms that were burrowed into their skins, and, you know, just a lot of the different things that were happening just on a day-to-day basis that people were living with, people that got worms. And so to be able to help, you know, just in a small way, even though honestly, I really didn't know a whole lot of what I was doing, just going based on directions that, you know, my dad had written up for me. And so from there, then coming back home to the States, you know, I knew that I still wanted to be in that world somehow. And I had a small business, really learned the operations and economics of really running a business. And especially because I was running it during the recession, and you know, it was a flower shop. So for a flower shop to successfully operate during the recession was really challenging, and had to learn how to really innovate in a way to enable business to continue growing, you know, when flowers are a novelty and a lot of people weren't buying flowers, right, during that time when everybody, you know, didn't was trying to save as much as possible. So after coming out of the recession and selling the business, then got the opportunity to jump into a startup tech company. And that wasn't even something that I had been thinking about. But once I landed there, then I was like, wow, I really love this. The freedom to be able to innovate, the flexibility, you know, of uh, being able to work with different people and to actually have people be receptive of new ideas and to be able to create something that is going to be impactful. So then, you know, a few years later, then reconnected with Jeff and realized that, you know, being a part of that whole health tech innovation space was seemed like the next step, you know. And Jeff had shared his idea of something that he was already working on in helping a high net worth individual that was coming to the US regularly and finding himself in the ER and having to wait, right? And I've experienced that too. You wait in the ER unless you're bleeding out, you know, you can often wait hours. And for this person to wait to have, you know, to get a prescription filled or whatever it is, so his staff had reached out to Jeff to put together, you know, um, physicians and specialists that he would be able to call upon when he's in the US to be able to help him. And so that was the initial idea of concierge medicine for those that are coming to the US from, you know, international and without insurance, right, to be able to pay cash and have access to the appropriate physicians. So then, you know, joined up with Jeff in that because Jeff has always been somebody that I've looked up to, and the opportunity to work with him was just ideal, especially in this medical space and tech. So it just seemed like the right fit. And then over time, realized that that is a need for high net worth individuals, but it was also a niche. And so we decided to broaden the transparency and access, right? Because that high net worth individual, the reason why he couldn't get care was not because it wasn't available, but because he didn't know how to access the information of who could help him, and to be able to get to that person. So just increasing that to the greater population, seeing that, a lot of people, the top three things in all surveys is people want um, proximity, right? So basically access to somebody who is close to them. And then they want transparency to price. How much is it going to cost me? A lot of people right now go to the hospital or to the ER, wherever it is, hoping that it's not going to cost too much. It's not going to bankrupt them, right? I believe it's over 50% of the people that file for bankruptcy, it has to do with medical costs. And so a lot of people aren't even getting the care and waiting as long as they can before they go to the hospital. I have a friend whose father ended up in that same situation and he's dealing with it right now. He waited as long as he could because he didn't want to go to the hospital and ended up going to the ER because he got too sick. And now it's costly for him. It's costly for the insurance company, right? Because they have to provide more care and it costs the hospital. So by empowering people to have all this information and make, decisions based on what they know is best for themselves, and also empowering their physician, those that are caring for them, with all the information they need to actually come alongside them and help them. Yeah, that was kind of the reason why we decided to expand it for access to everyone and move in that direction.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, excited to dive in a little bit later into the nuances of Transpara and the healthcare space. But yeah, so for Tony, for you personally, professionally, tell us a little bit about your journey. How you
Yeah, so I ended up in a space that I didn't expect. So growing up, my mom, our mom, was really into science, right? So she was a chemistry degree and was really kind of that sort of inspired us from a scientific perspective to kind of pursue that route. Dad being an attorney, we definitely had sort of the political side, which kind of bled into a business kind of acumen. But I wanted to be a physician. It was pretty clear after about the first year of high school. I was like, okay, doctor sounds cool. I like the feel of this. So after I did my undergrad at University of Washington in biochemistry, I took a couple years off and I worked in various places before I applied for medical school. And one of them was a health food store. And it was amazing to me the difference in people who came in who started to understand how they could take control of their health and sort of make it about them, and about how, hey, if I own this versus maybe having a physician heal myself, the difference over months of them becoming healthy and becoming healthier. And this concept of wellness then was a big differentiator for me around what do I really want to do with my career in the healthcare space. And so I applied to the University of Washington and I applied to Bastyr. And Bastyr is a naturopathic medical school, and I opted to go to Bastyr. And when I did that, my first thought was, this is going to be fantastic. I'm going to help all these people. And I got a job at this little company called Lynx Medical Systems as a part-time job while I was in medical school. And I fell in love with the technology that they were trying to bring forward. So they were a coding company, which means effectively they bring the physician documentation in, the doctor's notes, and then they translate it or code it into the codes that end up on the medical claims. And that was their niche, right? And they also had a billing component to it that they used. Well, they realized that the problem was mostly that the physician documentation was often lacking to be able to get to the right code set that would go to the insurance company. So they started building products that they brought to the market to assist with that, and specifically started in the emergency department. So as I was going through medical school, I was falling in love with technology. I got the little SQL 7 for Dummies book. I got the VB6 for Dummies book, and I actually started creating technology to help me in medical school. So I had built this UI for my treatment plans in the third and the fourth year around, okay, if this patient has this, what are the different modalities you can use to treat? In naturopathic medicine, there are a billion different things you can do. It's more than just prescriptions and drugs and lifestyle changes. It's like this really broad set of data. So I started building that. Eventually, the company's like, hey, we're going to now start growing. We need a CRM. and they didn't have one, and we were pretty early. So I sat down for 24 hours and I wrote a CRM. We used that for 3 or 4 months. It was fantastic. They were able to port it out to a off-the-shelf CRM system. And my system never went down. That CRM system we bought in the first month went down like 3 or 4 times. I'm like, we should go back to Tony's. I called it Call Tracker, and it was beautiful. So so I learned this tech, and it, like, the company just, all of a sudden we figured out our little niche, right? We figured out that in emergency departments, majority of the costs or the effort was related to the nursing staff and what they're doing, and the acuity of the problem presented. So that portion that you charge for the hospital side, we're talking about the physician side, but we're talking about the hospital side, there are algorithms you can create that says if this patient comes in with chest pain, even if they come out of the emergency department with heartburn, there's a whole bunch of things you have to do to prove that it's heartburn. And so you could basically take all the presenting problems and score them such that you can create a broad algorithm, and then you can tag on additional services as they move through to determine how much you really should charge a patient. That little algorithm it completely made our company blow up. I traveled about 80% of the time. After I graduated medical school, I was like, you know what, this is really cool. I can go in, I can help with triage tracking, I can help with all the different like documentation stuff. We create a system where you could print out documentation based on presenting problem. The physician would fill it out, scan it back in, and then that would be used for coding and moving forward. So it give this concept of more tailored documentation for physicians. We took that system, we sold it to we sold it to Cerner. They use that documentation system today in their FirstNet applications throughout the world. We developed algorithms to help nurses understand the impact of starting and stopping IVs at different times and what that really meant in terms of billing. And so we were helping both clinical care and the administration to make sure that the emergency room itself is not just a cost center, but actually a revenue center. So we flipped it around a little bit so that we made it so that we were capturing the appropriate resources and billing at the appropriate rates for hospitals. And in fact, Transpara Healthcare boasted that they used our algorithm for 10 years to pay for their entire Epic implementation, which is $100 million.
Oh, wow.
So this little algorithm, in a time in which Susie had mentioned the downturn, the recession, this little algorithm was the easiest thing to sell. We just get it in front of the CFO. They're like, you're going to make me $1 million more a year? Sign it, right? That was that easy. So we got purchased and flipped and or bought again. The company got absorbed. The fish ate the bigger fish, and ultimately ended up in Optum. And Optum is part of United Health Group. United Health Group owns United Healthcare and Optum, and we're like 4 or 5 on Forbes. So we're talking about $200-300 billion in revenue. So it's a really big corporate space. And to Jeff's point, innovation in that space is not easy because you have all this corporation that is beholden to their shareholders, have fiduciary responsibility to make sure they're keeping their shareholders happy, and yet they're asked to sort of throw money at things that they're not sure about. And so this concept of how do you really innovate was interesting to me. And really, to me, as a naturopath, my thought was like, what are we really in the business of? Because everybody thinks of healthcare as the thing, like this is what you do for health. The reality is healthcare is only about 6 to 10% of what determines someone's health. So really what it is sick care. So this is something that was a concept that was sort of born out of a number of different folks talking about with a number of different folks. And this concept that really you're only interacting a very short period of time in sick care. And then there's all these other determinants of health. There's genetics, there's environmental factors, and then a big part is behaviors, right? Whether you eat that donut or not, whether you go out and run that mile or you don't, right? Whether you stress out about your coworker or you don't, or you have a way to cope with that, right? Whether you get enough sleep. These are the things that really impact health, and the cost benefit ratio of like spending money that direction on making sure these determinants of health are battled in the health, really the wellness space, is tremendous on the ability to reduce the cost of sick care for everyone across the world. There are some countries that do it way better than the United States, and a lot of it has to do with our culture on what we consider our normal activities, whether exercise or how we eat, things like that. So that whole space was super exciting to me, and so I moved through the organization, assisting in a number of different ways, and landed in this patient experience space. How do we use that information to understand what populations we need to engage. How do we help them understand where they need to go from a care perspective, right? How do we make it so that it's very easy for them to engage with the system, easy for them to understand the costs, easy for them to get follow-up care or get referral? Like all this, the cool thing about Optum is that we're in proximity to United Healthcare. So we understand the provider space real well because we own the largest physician practice, Optum Care, in the United States. And we own the largest health insurance company in the United States. So we have this understanding of the healthcare system very intrinsically that allows us to solve these problems in different ways. And so for me, that was the path that I took to get where I am now. Now on the innovation from a just a purely like directional one direction side. On the other side with Will, and Will, you know this as well as anyone, right? So you were in Zurich getting your PhD. You had this crazy idea to create a startup company in the web services space. And so I sort of jumped in and helped you with pieces of it. I did very, very little compared to, your work, but I started kind of getting the bug for, hey, there's some other things outside of that direct path that we can do together. That was super fun. Helping in a very small way with Transpara to try and offer some of the experiences I have with Susie and connected with Jeff and sort of looking at what we can do differently. Because there's some things that a big company can do very well. And there's other things that really, when you're talking about developing either using nascent technology or developing intellectual property that's sort of thinking outside the box, it's nice to have these smaller players to come in and really excite the market. So Transpara Health is one that I'm really excited about because the focus is really about value and outcomes and getting people to get excited about making decisions for themselves with health. And that to me is a really, really cool part of, I think, the future of medicine is being able to empower the patient the right way. Social networks and the technology have really gotten us to a point where we understand psychologically and technologically how to engage. Now we have to take the challenge associated with wellness and combine the two together in a way that really changes or improves the outcomes of health and wellness in the United States and throughout the world.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah. We could probably be here all day, so I'm excited to have the three of you. So I'm personally curious about all of the different barriers and problems with regard to entrepreneurship. And obviously we're talking about health sciences and life sciences here. So I'm curious to learn a little bit more, Jeff, about IntuitiveX. Where do you specialize? If I'm a budding entrepreneur interested in building something in the life sciences, how do I work with IntuitiveX?
Sure. And I'm going to be honest, like our model has been refined over time. Whereas before we were almost exclusively working with entrepreneurs and helping them to develop their idea, protect their intellectual property, create a prototype, and test and validate their prototype within the network of clinicians and scientists, and then help them to raise capital, help them build an executive team, leadership team that can help them take this idea forward, help them with regulatory, and then finally help them to commercialize. Mm-hmm. And all those components, there are critical factors, again, back to that four-legged stool model. There are critical factors in each of those four areas that you simply need to have, or you need to verify that they've sort of satisfied the requirements in those four areas of business, IP, clinical and scientific. And that's where it's really different from just your typical tech company, Mm-hmm. But over time, we've recognized that it's not only the single entrepreneur or inventor or startup companies that need this type of guidance. It's also larger, more developed startups, venture-backed startups, as well as even publicly traded companies in the life science space that may need some guidance and expertise on what's happening in the startup space in their own industry as well. So we sort of take it in more of a funnel type of model now, where anyone who comes to us at the top of the funnel, we just provide consulting services. So anyone regardless of who you are, whether you're an individual, whether you're a startup or a large company, we treat you as a client, and then we provide services that we can provide for either an individual or a startup or a large company. And then as we get an opportunity to work with these individuals or startups on that end of the spectrum, then we have a much better idea of who they are, what type of team that they have, how valid is their technology, and is the timing of it correct? Is it the right time for their technology? Even though it might be a great idea, unless the market's ready and willing to take on that technology, then it may not be very successful. And I would say that Susie and Transpara is a good example of that, where it's an idea that was very timely. It was, people are looking for transparency in healthcare. I mean, that's the reason why the costs are so high, because there's a lack of transparency in healthcare today. And I'm talking about even in the cost of the services that we provide as providers, as well as the cost of products that are out in the marketplace. Like, you can't go out and find a list of drug prices that you're going to be paying at one institution versus another. It just simply doesn't exist, or at least it doesn't exist freely. And so having more access to data that's transparent is one of the things that we wholeheartedly support, through Transpara, where just like any other type of consumer product that you can think of today, there's full transparency. You go out and try to buy a car, and you know exactly what the prices are going to be from one dealership to the next, right? And the blue book value. You can put in all the different requirements and get to an estimated price of that product. And it doesn't matter if it's a car, doesn't matter if it's a house, doesn't matter if it's a flat screen TV. That information is available. It's publicly available, But for some reason, in healthcare, the most important thing in our lives is our health. But yet, in healthcare, it's much more opaque. And I think we really need to do a better job of creating this type of innovation that allows for us to have more transparency in the products and services that we have in healthcare today. But back to your question, we work with all types of customers, and working with these customers over time, we develop a relationship, and then if we know that there's a good fit both ways, both from the customer side and our side, if we feel that it's in line with the ethos that we have within IntuitiveX, and we invite them to be a portfolio company, and Transpara Health is a great example of that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So Susie, tell us more about Transpara Health. Obviously, a lot of problems with transparency in the industry. What direction are you taking your company, and what should our listeners and our audience be aware of and be looking for as Transpara continues to grow in the market?
Mm-hmm. So there's the long-term goal and direction in areas that we want to focus, and then there's the current areas that we're focusing right now in this acute time of this pandemic. So our long-term is to have a resource and be a place where people can go and find, the right provider. So depending on all the different options that are out there, to be able to see what are the services that they offer. So even putting price aside, where can you go to see between Dr. A, B, and C and the different services that they provide? Because, for example, naturopaths, they all have different methods and areas of focus. For spine surgeons, right? So if I have to get spine surgery, then how am I going to know where to go, the difference between Dr. Rowe and another doctor, and to know that Dr. Rowe provides minimally invasive spine surgery, that the outcome's going to be better, that my recovery rate is going to be faster, there's going to be a reduced rate of infection. So all these different details that people just don't even know to ask, right? So if I don't know to ask these questions, how am I going to find the right person that I need to go see? And even personally, the things that I've experienced just really drive this further for me. Like, my insurance bill, like, to know how to read it, it's not legible really to be able to understand what's happening. And after taking a look at it and calling and finding out exactly what this all means, to find that I was charged twice for a procedure,
No.
and then it took me 6 months to get that removed, right? And it took me like constantly calling. And how many people have that type of time and just to be able to go through that whole hassle, right? It was really painful, and I just didn't want to work with that insurance company anymore either, right? And a lot of people I know, they just pay the bill because it's like, okay, I just assume this is my health insurance, they're looking out for me, so I'm going to pay the bill. And also, like, I was dealing with infertility, and this is a story that I share because a lot of people have come back and said, I can really identify with what you went through. And I wish I had known that that was also available. And um, we financially couldn't afford IVF treatment. A lot of my friends went through it. Some had their insurance cover it. Most insurance don't cover IVF, right? And so it was just waiting and trying to research and figure out, is it the foods that you need to eat, or, a lot of the different things. And then eventually learned word of mouth about fertility acupuncture. And so it took a month to get an appointment because she was so busy. But once she took a look at my blood work and my cycle, she said, give me 3 months. And within 3 months, I got pregnant. It cost me less than $1,000, and it was much less invasive than IVF treatment. And I believe that IVF is there and it is valuable because acupuncture is not going to work for everybody, right? But at least it is an option that people can take, maybe as the first level, because it isn't as costly and it's less invasive, and starting there. And after 3 months, you can see, whether this is something that's going to work or not based on seeing your blood work and things. And I even have a friend who went through chemotherapy, went into remission, and through fertility acupuncture, she was able to get pregnant and had a healthy baby, right? So to be able to empower people with this kind of information. And I like, for example, the real estate world, right? Everybody thought, oh, by putting all of that information and giving people access to that information, real estate agents are going to lose their jobs, right? That didn't actually happen. It just changed the way that they operated. And it actually helped alleviate the load because people were now able to go in and research on their own and really figure out what they really want, right? And I believe in healthcare as well, that if we can empower the people with that information, then you're going to actually get them more involved in their health and in their outcomes and being able to communicate better. And a lot of the tools that are out there, I think the pandemic has really um, driven that just a little bit further to, I guess, enable physicians and healthcare systems that have been slower to adopt change, to adopt telemedicine. And a lot of the things like remote care is now something that we're specifically working on. So then I'll speak just briefly about what we're doing right now in this pandemic. Is we saw a lot of the price gouging that was happening, and a lot of the governments and groups saying that they didn't have access to PPE, when on our side we were seeing that it was readily available, right? And so we quickly worked with the Proto team to be able to develop that a portion of our site to show what PPE is available, what should you be expecting to pay, because some states were paying $15 for an N95, when even in the beginning they could have paid $5 or less for it, right? And so helping bridge the gap so that governments and health systems are not being price gouged, and that they are getting the access and supply that they need in a timely manner. And also with the lack of testing, a lot of the senior living, nursing homes, long-term facilities that had high-risk populations and getting hit really hard. Working with IntuitiveX, we were really empowering these facilities with this comprehensive management system, where it starts off with testing, because you have to test to know who is sick and to be able to quickly isolate them so that it doesn't spread, right? Contradictory to the way that things are happening right now in the United States. And then once you go from testing, then you can remote monitor. A lot of people now are taking temperatures, they're assessing their symptoms. But even with symptoms, because we're still learning about the way that this is affecting us, how it's being manifest, people don't know the questions to ask, right? And so this app enables you to actually see what are the symptoms and check yes or no. Are you exhibiting any of these symptoms? And sometimes it's something like we don't even realize, oh yeah, I had a stomach issue and I had a headache earlier today. And then to be able to document that so that the physician can keep track of all of that data over time. And then if you see an uptick, so there is a specific bar that once, a person crosses that threshold, then the physician reaches out to that particular resident. And even the living facility, they are able to have all of their staff and their residents on a dashboard to be able to track all of that information, rather than the former way or the way that a lot of them are currently doing it on a spreadsheet, right? And so this will equip them to reduce the burden of the nurses and caretakers to be able to have that information, and especially the staff, because they're the ones going in and out of the facilities, right? And so to be able to remote monitor them and test and isolate in a much timely manner is what's going to really help the living facilities and the higher risk population. So that's what we're currently working on and have implemented into several communities here in Washington.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, it just seems like there's a lot of confusion out there. A lot of. I imagine nursing home facilities is on the front lines of needing to figure out a solution ASAP. So that's amazing.
Yep.
That can provide that kind of help and service. So backing up a little bit, why did we get, we meaning the global healthcare community, but specifically healthcare in the U.S., how did we get to the place where it's so cryptic around pricing? How do we get to the place where we don't know what our bill is going to be before we go in? And I'm just curious if any of the three of you know the history behind that. Maybe Tony, you know a little bit about it.
I can start to help fill in where they're knowledgeable. It's pretty complex, and a lot of it has to do with the way that hospitals and insurance companies negotiate for prices and how much they're really going to pay for particular services. There's a lot of magic that happens behind the curtain around those negotiations. And each healthcare facility are going to likely negotiate different rates with different payers, and each payers likely negotiate different rates with different providers related to, on geographics, related to how essentially that they build out the previous year. And there are a bunch of really smart people that try to make sure that they balance the rate of reimbursement to the risk associated with that on the payer side. And that information generally is something that health insurance companies were a little bit careful about trying to make available for a variety of business reasons, and also providers as well for a variety of business reasons. When it comes to if you were just like set up a hospital and say, how much should I charge for this? Let's just take insurance out of the picture. You would basically create a list of all the things you did, whether it's procedures or supplies, and you would just put a dollar amount on it, right? That's how, like a traditional model, like you would for a retail store. And that's called the charge master, and every hospital has that. The reality is that if you just sort of make that available, it doesn't necessarily give great insights to the patient, what they're really going to pay, because their insurance is going to pay a portion of it. And in fact, the amount that's actually billed to the insurance is based on that negotiated rate. And that's all different for every insurance company. So every person would have to have their individualized, based on their insurance and their plan they have, potentially a different dollar amount. And it's really like, how do we use technology to just reduce the effort of you could figure that out. Like if you were a patient, you could make some phone calls and you could probably figure it out after hours on the phone with the insurance company and the provider if you really wanted to. The goal of technology is to make things more simple, more convenient, less time intensive to do that. And companies like Transpara are going to be super important on sort of aggregating that over time, especially as the government is starting to now realize they need to put regulation in place to make sure that this, I call it BS, associated with hiding some of these things that don't really need to be hidden. They should allow for transparency to occur as those regulations start hitting, which they are in the next few years, that we're able to provide services to offer that transparency. But the problem really is all related to those historical models around how that contracting is done. And also, some companies are literally scared of exposing to patients the real cost of some of these things that they're potentially going to be, the services are going to potentially be rendered, all the way to manufacturing, the process of getting drugs on the market, the whole the drug thing is sort of different. And there's these pharmacy benefit management companies that act in the middle, and they extract rent, coordinating between manufacturers and pharmacies and providers, and there's a lot of complexity. And because of that, there are a lot of people and a lot of business people that try and come in and, I don't want to take advantage of it, but try and offer services and extract rent through those services and through moving data around. And that's prevalent in the United States because we're driven on a capitalistic society. So I'm going to stop there. I'm sure others have some ideas around their thoughts around it, but that's what I see.
So last year, the White House issued a mandate that said that by January 2021, that all hospitals had to be listing their prices, but not only their at-cost prices or the full price, but they had to list their negotiated prices with all these different payers. And they had to make a single file machine readable so that APIs could go around and collect all that data. Is that going to happen? Is that even remotely feasible and possible? Do you have any sense from the hospitals that this is going to happen, or what's the latest here?
My opinion is that if it's a regulation, that some will do it, but until the stick comes in, and it's a really big stick, it's going to take them a little while to get there. And how exactly they interpret the regulations may be different. So if you're going to ask me, you're going to snap your fingers, and as an entrepreneur, I'm going to be able to create an application and hit APIs and pull all this data together and create a awesome consumer experience. I wouldn't bet on that January 1st.
At least for January 1st. Obviously, that is the goal, is to get there. But what is the stick? Did I hear something around $300 a day for the house? Is that what the stick is currently? As a fine if they don't post those prices? I think that's that. We could look that up and put it in the show notes, but it's something like that. Susie, do you feel like that's a big enough stick to sway these hospitals?
Definitely not, because even January of 2020, the rule was that hospitals had to post their prices, right, in a readable format, not their negotiated prices, but their listed prices, and most didn't. And a lot of the people that I were talking to in clinics, health systems, all of that, they said, well, we're just waiting to see what so-and-so does. We want to see who this, hospital over there posting their prices and see what they're posting. And even when I was talking to like smaller clinics or private practices and asking them, we would love to get your list of services and your direct prices. And they're like, well, what about this physician over there? Did he list his prices? What if he's going to change his prices based on mine? And so I think that just kind of goes up the ladder of just, there's a lot of competition in the prices, and the assumption that people are going to shop solely based on price. And I disagree with that. But back to, hospitals and posting prices, I don't think it's going to happen January 2021, because that $300 a day price point, that for some procedures is much less than the difference between their list price and their negotiated price, right? Some of them can range in the thousands, right? So if you're talking about like an MRI, it can range in the thousands. If you're talking about, some types of surgeries and procedures, they range in the thousands. And so I don't think $300 is, because how many patients per day in a hospital, right? So even if it's less than $300 per patient, it's still, because it's just $300 per day flat, right? Not per patient. So that's not even a nuisance in my opinion.
There's some interesting new pressures related to COVID and the scarcity of patients actually looking for elective care or even preventative care. And I think that it could potentially be a challenge if hospitals think, oh, if I post my prices and this other place doesn't, it might drive off a percentage of those elective related services. It's the difference between solvency and insolvency for a lot of these hospitals that are going through furloughs right now because people are afraid of going to seek health care. So they're afraid of catching this new virus. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that overlays these regulations and whether or not the government might decide to kind of slow play it a little bit until things come back to what might be more of a steady state. Might not be the normal, what it was, but I think it'll be interesting how this plays out.
So a final question for the three of you, and I'm curious to get each of your thoughts on this. For potential founders that are interested in coming in and adding value, creating some kind of product or service in this space to make it less insane for either hospitals or patients or payers or the drug manufacturers or the various third parties in between, as you say, Tony, that are charging rent. What advice would you give to those founders to, one, learn more about this industry, and two, how to navigate this gauntlet as they're going about potentially building their businesses? So Tony, we'll start with you.
Sure, I'll take 30 seconds on that. First is, it's not as scary as it was. It used to be that, like even 5-10 years ago, it was really hard to get at data in healthcare. But a lot of the work that Apple's doing and a lot of work that they're doing with web-based APIs, and the government is pushing these directly as part of their regulations, there's going to be more opportunity for, if you have a really cool idea, to go out and figure it, work with someone. If you're not a technologist yourself, talk to some technologists and just vet that idea. You may find that it's easier to get the data than you think, and or if it's not, there may be great value in being the one to pioneer a way to get it. So I would offer, give it a shot and work with people like Jeff, work with companies like Will and Proda as well. Whatever you need to do, depending on your idea, talk to as many people as you can to try and figure out this thing that I'm with, and ultimately maybe that will become your career. So it's really fun to sort of experiment with that. Don't necessarily quit your day job while you're doing that, but figure out there's something in the future you can do, and then you can make a transition. It's a cool experience to be able to think about and be able to move that direction.
How about you, Susie? What advice would you give to fellow entrepreneurs in this space?
Mm-hmm. I'd say you want to make sure that you are really flexible to change, that you are resilient to rejection, because there's a lot of it, and that you have to really cultivate your relationships, because different from other industries, healthcare, I've learned that it is really tied to who you know and the relationships around that, right? And the only reason why we are where we are is because we have IntuitiveX and Proda supporting us. Otherwise, there's no way, because it is such a huge industry, so many regulations, and like, I'm sure physicians, they even know, like, if you retire, physicians that are practicing, see you differently. And even in the innovation space, I really believe that if you're practicing and innovating, it's one thing. If you are innovating and not practicing, it's one thing. And, to be able to have all of those relationships together, I don't think so one thing is, as an innovator, you have to be willing to work together, even with sometimes your competitors, right? Because nobody's going to be able to solve anything on their own. It's too big. So working together and bringing everybody together in this is key.
Jeff, how about you? Even around IP protection and others, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs getting into this space?
I mean, sort of, in support of what Tony and Susie were saying, I think this is a team sport. This is not something that you can do it on an island by yourself. And I think that's where a lot of people in life sciences, they get it wrong, where like if you're a scientist or a clinician, like you can sort of hole up in your university and do the publication and become a professor without collaborating a lot, and you could, as a clinician, you could start up your own solo practice, at least in the past, less so more recently, without having to get a lot of help from other people. Like you could sort of do it on your own, where I think things have changed quite significantly. And I think trying to innovate, it takes a team, it takes a team of different people with varying skills and experiences and know-how. And what I've seen is that I've seen the mistake of folks who believe that if they build it, people will come. And that's not how it works here in the life sciences. If you have a great product, but you don't know exactly how to actually, market it and convince physicians to use it, then there's no chance that it's going to succeed. I think that, again, it's a team sport. You need different contributions from different experts that know how to get through each one of those steps. But once you learn those steps, it's not rocket science. There's definitely a method by which you can succeed and bring to market really creative, innovative products that can help a lot of people. So I think that the word of advice that I would give is rely on other people's expertise and ask for help, because people want to help, and this is a really exciting time, I think. If you take a look at what's happening with the marketplace today, like the market's taken a huge hit because of the worldwide pandemic. But if you take a look at some healthcare companies, specifically the ones that are working on solutions for COVID, they're actually doing really well. And so people say this, is that healthcare is also recession proof, because people get sick, and there will always be a need for people and products and services in the healthcare industry. So it's a great time to be in this space right now. It's really cool being able to see and have visibility in what's coming at us, right? And I think, in all honesty, I think the marriage of the technology that we see in the tech industry being applied to really complex, difficult healthcare problems, that's where I see a lot of potential. And I think that's where this is headed next.
All right. Well, thank you. Where can our viewers and listeners find you all online? How can they learn more about IntuitiveX and Transpara Health? And Jeff, how can people find you?
Yeah, so our website is intuitive-x.com. And so, feel free to take a look. You can Google IntuitiveX. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn as well. More than happy to connect with you there as well.
How about you, Susie? How can people find you? How can people find Transpara?
Yeah, transpara.health or transparahealth.com. And you can email us at info@transpara.health, and I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Sweet. And how about you, Tony? How can people find you?
Just look me up on LinkedIn, Anthony Little, Optum. You'll find me at Dr. Tony Little on Twitter. I'm not super active on Twitter, but I keep trying, so you can find me there.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I'll look forward to continuing the conversation with you all. Thank you all for being here for what is likely part one of a multi-part conversation. So thanks again. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Be well.
Great.
Everybody.
All right, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. As a reminder, if you're listening, you can view any of the episodes via video at wclittle.com. Also, a few quick things. One, I have a general newsletter where I write about emerging technology, software development, blockchain, startups, and a lot of the content that we discuss on this podcast. So go to wclittle.com and hit subscribe. That site is actually a new project that I've helped create called Satchel. Satchel is a simplified online publishing and newsletter platform that helps facilitate the communication between creators and their audience. Also, I want to bring to your attention a product called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, you can learn about how to create a new venture of your own. And Startup Rocket is a portfolio company of Proto Ventures, which I mentioned in the intro, is the operator investor group that I'm a part of, and I'm one of the general partners. So, thanks for listening. I'll look forward to future episodes, and go to wclittle.com and subscribe to the newsletter. And if you think of it, if you could leave a review for this podcast anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, that would help get the word out so others can listen to the content as well. Thank you.